On a freezing winter night in a small coastal town, where the wind sounded like it was carrying old secrets across the snow, a barefoot young woman sat alone on the church steps, cold, hungry, and certain the world had forgotten her. Families passed by, heading home to warm dinners and bright lights, never noticing the quiet heartbreak sitting in the shadows. But then, a tiny voice broke the silence. A child stopped. A dog approached. And a police officer made a choice that would change all of their lives forever. How could a simple hug from a little girl transform a stranger's fate? How did one night of kindness turn into a new beginning? Before we begin this story of hope, compassion, and second chances, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. And may your day be warm, peaceful, and filled with gentle miracles. Winter Harbor, a small coastal town tucked into the rugged edge of Maine, always transformed into something both beautiful and unforgiving in December. The wind came in off the Atlantic with a thin, icy bite, and the streets shimmered under a dusting of new snow. That evening, the cold was the kind that seeped into bone, the kind that made the whole town move a little faster, shoulders tucked, scarves pulled higher. The sky hung low, heavy with more snow waiting to fall, and the air smelled faintly of pine resin and wood smoke from fireplaces scattered across the hills. At the heart of the town stood Cedar Light Church, a century-old building of pale stone and stained glass windows that glowed like jewels whenever the lanterns inside were lit. On the wide front steps polished smooth by decades of worshipers, sat a young woman curled into herself as if trying to disappear. This was Riley Hart, 24 years old, with long, chestnut-brown hair tangled from weeks of sleeping wherever she could find shelter. Her face was delicate but sharp around the cheekbones, the way hunger often carved itself into someone who had been doing their best to survive too long. Her eyes were a soft, storm-washed hazel, the kind that still held a trace of gentleness, even after everything life had taken from her. She wore a thin dress that had once been beige but was now dulled by wear, and her feet were bare, red from the cold. Riley had been homeless for 8 months following a chain of tragedies: her mother's sudden stroke, the job she lost after missing too many days, the apartment she couldn't keep without the paycheck. She had always been a quiet, determined soul, someone who tried to solve her problems alone because she hated being a burden. But winter had a way of making solitude feel like punishment. She didn't expect anyone to truly see her. Winter Harbor was a kind town, but like most places, people often passed by things that made their hearts uncomfortable. Tonight, families spilled from the church doors after the Christmas Eve service, mothers adjusting scarves, fathers carrying sleeping toddlers, teens laughing under flickering street lamps. Their footsteps made crisp sounds in the icy snow. A tiny voice broke the hum of adult conversation. "Daddy? Why is that lady sitting in the snow?" Riley lifted her head slowly. A little girl, 3 years old at most, stood a few yards away, bundled in a cranberry red coat with little white buttons shaped like snowflakes. Her blonde hair, tied in pigtails, bounced whenever she moved. Her name was Lily Carson, a child with large blue eyes bright with curiosity and empathy, far older than her years. Lily was the kind of girl who talked to ladybugs, hugged dogs on the street, and believed every stranger might be a friend. Nothing cruel had touched her life yet, so she gave herself to the world without hesitation. Beside her stood her father, Officer Grant Carson, a 35-year-old police officer with a tall, solid frame shaped by years of physical training. He had short, dark brown hair, close-cropped for practicality, and eyes that carried both exhaustion and quiet strength. His face was angular, handsome in a rugged way, with lines that hinted he had seen more sorrow than he ever spoke of. A widower for a year, Grant carried grief the way others carried backpacks, silently but constantly. He did his job with precision and heart, but he approached strangers cautiously, always weighing danger against duty. Tonight, he wore a navy blue winter patrol uniform beneath a heavy police-issued coat. Snow clung to the cuffs. At Grant's side trotted Atlas, his German Shepherd K9 partner. Atlas was 3 years old, with black and tan fur thick enough to catch falling snowflakes, dark, intelligent eyes, and a powerful build. The dog was both disciplined and deeply loyal, trained for search and rescue, but known to nudge his head under the hands of anyone who looked like they needed comfort. Atlas had scars hidden under his fur from an accident the year before, the same accident that had taken Grant's wife, and since then, he had grown protective of Lily and remained sensitive to emotional distress. Animals sometimes knew pain when they saw it. "Lily," Grant said softly, "don't point. It's not polite." "But Daddy," the girl insisted, her voice trembling with worry, "she's not wearing shoes." Grant followed Lily's gaze, and the moment he saw Riley's bare feet against the snow, something in his expression changed. Concern tightened his jaw. He hesitated, wrestling with the instinct to keep his daughter close and the moral weight pressing down on him. He'd spent the last year telling himself he didn't have room for anything outside of work and Lily, but he was also the man who once dove into an icy river to save a stranger. Compassion wasn't a switch he could permanently turn off. Lily slipped her hand from her father's grasp before he could stop her and ran toward Riley. Atlas followed automatically, ears perked, sensing the shift. "Hi," Lily said brightly, stopping right in front of Riley. "I'm Lily. What's your name?" Riley blinked, startled, not only by the child's presence but by the warmth directed at her so freely. "I'm Riley," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Hi. Are you waiting for someone?" Lily asked. "Is your family coming to get you?" Riley looked away. The cold wasn't the reason her breath shook. "No, I don't have family." Lily's face fell. Her lower lip wobbled with heartbreak on behalf of a stranger. "No family? Not even for Christmas?" Riley didn't answer. She couldn't trust her voice not to crack. Suddenly, Lily stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Riley's neck. Riley stiffened in surprise. Then the warmth of the child's tiny body broke something inside. Her. She had held her sorrow in for so long it had become a shield, but a hug this pure, this fierce, disarmed her. Tears welled before she could stop them. Atlas stepped closer, sniffing Riley's hand gently, giving a soft, sympathetic whine as if offering his own quiet support. Grant hurried over, crouching beside them. He expected to see Riley overwhelmed or Lily uncomfortable, but instead he found something else entirely, an unspoken truth hanging in the cold air. This moment mattered. "I'm sorry," Riley choked out as she pulled back, wiping her cheeks with trembling fingers. "I didn't mean to—" "No," Grant interrupted, voice thick. "Don't apologize. I'm the one who should." He let out a breath, as if confessing something to the silent night. "I almost walked past you, and I shouldn't have." He looked at Lily, then at Riley, and something steadied inside him. "You shouldn't be alone tonight. Not in this cold. Not on Christmas Eve." Atlas sat beside Riley, tail brushing her ankle, already making his decision. Grant extended a gloved hand. "Let us help you. Please." Riley stared at him, at Lily, at Atlas, and for the first time in many months, she felt a glimmer of something she had lost. Hope. The drive toward the Carson family home took them away from the glowing center of Winter Harbor and into quieter neighborhoods where houses leaned into the cold, like old friends bracing against the wind. Street lamps cast long, golden halos across the snow-covered road, turning the night into a patchwork of shadow and amber light. Riley sat in the back seat beside Lily, unsure where to rest her hands, knees drawn close, Grant's heavy patrol coat draped around her shoulders. The warmth of the vehicle was so abrupt it felt almost unreal. Her bare toes, stiff from the cold, tingled painfully as they thawed. Atlas lay on the floor between the seats, his head angled back just enough to keep Riley in view, as if watching over her. Lily had her small hand wrapped around Riley's, swinging it gently with the carefree affection only children possessed. "We're going to Grandma Margaret's," Lily explained with great seriousness, as though discussing national policy. "She makes the best cookies, and she doesn't mind when people need help." Riley swallowed. She had forgotten what it sounded like when someone spoke about kindness as if it were an everyday certainty rather than a rare miracle. Grant glanced at them through the rearview mirror. "She'll be glad we're coming," he said, though a subtle tension pulled at his expression. Grant cared deeply about his mother, but he also knew Margaret could be formidable when she sensed something she considered unjust. Her compassion came laced with steel, shaped by losses she rarely spoke about. The Carson house appeared at last, a 2-story colonial home set back behind a line of old pine trees, the kind that stayed green even under heavy snow. Warm lights glowed in every downstairs window, casting a welcoming aura across the frosted yard. A wreath hung on the front door, thick with pine cones and red berries, tied with a slightly crooked bow, likely Lily's handiwork. Snow covered the front steps in powder, so soft it lifted with the breeze like a sigh. As they got out of the car, Atlas bounded forward, tail wagging more vigorously now that they were home. The cold hit Riley again, but it felt different this time. Sharp, yes, but no longer hopeless. Grant placed a steadying hand at her back as they walked toward the house. Before he could knock, the front door opened. Margaret Carson, Grant's mother, stood framed by the warm light inside. She was in her late 50s, tall with a straight-backed posture that hinted at a life spent balancing strength and warmth. Her silver hair was swept into a bun that loosened slightly around her temples, softening her otherwise authoritative presence. Her eyes, blue like Lily's but sharper, missed nothing. Margaret's face was lined at the corners, but not from age alone. Some lines were carved from laughter, others from grief. Her husband, a firefighter, had died nearly a decade ago during a warehouse collapse, and though the pain never fully left her, it had shaped her into someone who believed fiercely in community and compassion. She wore a thick knitted sweater, cream-colored with faint embroidery at the hem, and dark leggings tucked into warm house boots. "There you all are," she said, her voice a blend of sternness and affection as she opened the door wider. "Supper's nearly ready and—" She stopped when she finally noticed Riley. Margaret's gaze traveled over the girl's bare, reddened feet, the oversized patrol coat engulfing her, the way she subtly shifted her weight, as though unsure she was allowed to stand on such a welcome-looking doorstep. Margaret's expression softened instantly. "Oh, honey," she murmured. Without hesitation, Margaret stepped aside. "Come in, dear. You must be freezing." Riley hesitated, the threshold feeling impossibly heavy beneath her. Yet something in Margaret's voice held no pity, only recognition, as though she had seen someone like Riley before and remembered what it meant to be struggling. Grant guided her gently inside. Lily rushed ahead, dropping her boots in a messy pile. Atlas brushed snow from his coat before trotting in proudly. The house smelled of roasted chicken with rosemary, cinnamon, and something sweet warming in the oven. A fireplace crackled softly in the living room, and garlands hung along the walls where old photographs were displayed. Margaret ushered Riley toward the downstairs bathroom with the practicality of someone accustomed to caring for others. "Let's warm you up," she said, leading the way. "I'll run a hot bath for you. Grant, find her something to wear." "Yes, ma'am," Grant replied automatically, falling back into the tone of a man who'd been raised under this very roof. Inside the bathroom, steam began to rise from the filling tub. Margaret opened a linen cupboard and removed several neatly folded towels, fluffy, fresh, smelling faintly of lavender. "These belong to my daughter," she said gently, setting out a soft sweater and a pair of jeans on the counter. "She passed some years ago. You look about her size. I'd be honored if you wore them tonight." Riley's breath caught, not at the mention of the loss, but at the quiet generosity that wrapped itself around Margaret's words. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't want to be a—" "Dear," Margaret interrupted softly but firmly. "Kindness isn't a debt, so don't think of it that way." When the door clicked softly behind Margaret, Riley sank onto a small stool near the tub, overwhelmed. It had been months since she'd last seen her reflection in a proper mirror. Her cheeks were hollow, her hair tangled, her hands trembled slightly as she tested the water's warmth. But, for the first time in a long while, she felt the faintest spark of safety. While Riley bathed, Grant returned downstairs with an armful of folded clothes. Lily and Atlas were waiting in the kitchen, Lily sitting, cross-legged on the floor, feeding Atlas a dog biscuit shaped like a star. "Daddy, is she staying for dinner?" Lily asked eagerly. "Yes," Grant said. His voice tightened around the word, not with reluctance, but with something else. Relief. He glanced into the living room, where Margaret was adjusting the dinner table, adding an extra place setting without needing to be asked. Grant had grown up in this house, yet he suddenly felt as though he were seeing his mother with new eyes. She didn't question the circumstances or demand explanations. She simply opened the door wider. It was exactly what he had admired about his mother all his life, and what he hoped Lily would inherit. When Riley finally emerged from the bathroom, her hair damp and brushed smooth, cheeks warmed from the bath, and dressed in Margaret's daughter's soft clothes, the difference was startling. She looked not whole yet, not healed, but human again, like someone reclaiming pieces of themselves long thought lost. Atlas was the first to approach her, tail sweeping the floor in slow approval. Then Lily launched herself forward and wrapped both arms around Riley's waist. "You look pretty," Lily declared. Riley's laugh, a fragile, surprised sound, filled the hallway. Dinner that night was as comforting as the house itself. Margaret served roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and warm rolls brushed with butter. The conversation was gentle, never probing. Lily chattered about her favorite Christmas ornaments. Margaret told a story about Grant as a boy making snow angels in the backyard. Grant listened more than he spoke, his gaze occasionally drifting toward Riley, checking if she was comfortable. Riley ate slowly, as if savoring each bite not just for taste, but for meaning. She had spent so long surviving that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be welcomed. When dessert came, warm apple crumble, Margaret placed her hand lightly over Riley's. "You're safe here tonight, sweetheart." The fireplace crackled, snow tapped softly against the windows. Atlas slept curled under the table, his paws twitching in some dream. And in that gentle circle of light and warmth, something settled inside Riley. Something quiet, steady, almost like belonging. For the first time in months, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, protected, and cautiously she felt hope stretch its frozen limbs. Tonight, she had a place at a table. Tonight, she wasn't alone. Morning in Winter Harbor always arrived gently, as if the sun were hesitant to disturb the quietness that snow created overnight. Pale light filtered through the frosted windows of the Carson home, casting soft gold across the kitchen, where the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the crispness of winter air. Riley awoke in the spare bedroom Margaret had prepared for her, an attic room with slanted ceilings, patched quilts, and a small window overlooking the pine trees. She had slept more deeply than she had in months, the kind of rest that felt like being held. When she came downstairs, hair still damp from her morning shower, she found Margaret at the stove, flipping blueberry pancakes, humming an old folk tune. "Good morning, dear," Margaret said without turning, but her voice held a warmth that reached Riley before the words did. Riley murmured a greeting, still adjusting to the unfamiliar sensation of safety. Grant sat at the table in his uniform pants and a gray thermal shirt, boots half-laced, checking emails on his phone. His posture relaxed slightly when he saw Riley enter. As though her presence meant something to him, he didn't yet dare articulate. Lily sat beside him, swinging her legs under the chair, drawing little doodles of snowmen on scrap paper. Atlas rested at her feet, tail thumping lazily in greeting. Breakfast passed quietly but comfortably. It didn't feel like Riley was a guest, more like she was someone returning from a long journey and finally being allowed to sit down. Afterward, Margaret suggested taking Riley to the Winter Harbor Community Center to explore job options. Riley agreed, nervous but determined. She wanted to rebuild, not rely on the Carsons indefinitely. As Margaret gathered her keys, Grant approached Riley with a hesitant gentleness. "If anyone gives you trouble today," he said, "you call me, or Margaret, or the station." His concern wrapped around her like a second coat. "I'll be okay," she assured him, though her voice trembled slightly. "I know," Grant replied, "but you don't have to do everything alone anymore." It was a simple sentence, but it struck Riley deeply. Outside, snow crunched under boots as Margaret and Riley walked to Margaret's old Subaru. The air smelled of sea salt, carried inland from the harbor. Atlas lingered by the fence, watching them go, but staying behind at Grant's instruction. As they drove through town, Christmas decorations still hung in shop windows, like reminders of joy that didn't care about circumstance. Riley stared quietly out the window, hands twisting in her lap. "You okay?" Margaret asked gently. "Yes, just nervous." "That's perfectly normal," Margaret said with a smile. "New beginnings always feel that way. Doesn't mean they aren't worth it." The Winter Harbor Community Center was a red brick building with wide glass doors and a mural painted on the side, a swirling image of ocean waves, pine, forests, and the lighthouse that stood at the edge of town. Inside, the lobby was warm and bustling with activity. A few volunteers sorted canned goods for the food pantry. Children chasing each other left a trail of laughter in their wake. Standing behind the front desk was Nina Mulberry, the community center coordinator. She was a woman in her early 40s, petite with curly dark hair pulled into a bun that somehow always looked slightly crooked. Her round face was framed by bold glasses, and her clothing carried a comfortable, artsy vibe. Today, a teal sweater with tiny embroidered stars along the sleeves, paired with black jeans and soft boots. Nina had a cheerful energy, but also an undercurrent of seriousness earned from years of assisting families in crisis. Her compassion came from experience. She had grown up in foster care, aging out at 18, with nowhere to go until a social worker helped her find stability. Because of that, she treated every stranger as a version of herself that might simply need a door held open. "Margaret Carson," Nina exclaimed, "as I live and breathe." "Good morning, Nina," Margaret said. "This is Riley." Nina extended a warm hand. "Hi, Riley. Welcome." Her tone held no pity, only genuine interest. Riley relaxed a little. Nina helped them settle at a small desk in the office area, pulling out forms and discussing job openings. "We've got part-time support positions," she explained. "Front desk shifts, sorting donations, helping with after-school programs. Also, a cafe down the street is hiring mornings." Riley listened carefully, answering questions with growing confidence. Nina nodded approvingly. "You seem capable. We might have something for you as early as next week. Pay isn't glamorous, but the team is good." Riley felt a spark of cautious hope. She signed a few forms with hands trembling only slightly. As they were leaving, Nina leaned close to Margaret and whispered, "She's been hurt, but she's got fight. She'll do well." Margaret gave a grateful nod. The drive back felt lighter, as though the air itself sensed the shift. When they arrived home, a surprise awaited them. Grant was in the yard tossing a ball into the snow for Atlas to retrieve. He had returned from his shift early. Lily ran outside to greet them, arms flailing like a tiny windmill. "Riley! Riley!" she shouted. "Atlas learned a new trick. Watch!" She threw the ball. Atlas bounded after it with the grace of a creature born to run through winter. Riley laughed, a sound still fragile but growing stronger each time she used it. Later that afternoon, while Lily napped and Atlas curled beside her, Grant found Riley standing near the window, watching snow drift past the glass. He stepped closer, hesitating a moment before speaking. "How was the community center?" "Good," she said quietly. I think I might start working there. Maybe soon." "That's great," Grant said. And he meant it. Something about her progress made his own heart ease a little, like seeing someone climb out of a hole he knew too well. He cleared his throat. "My mom likes you, you know?" Riley smiled faintly. "She's wonderful." "She is," Grant agreed softly. "And she doesn't let people feel small. It's a gift." Riley looked up at him. "You do that too." The words hit him unexpectedly, loosening something in his chest. "I don't know about that," he murmured. "I think you underestimate yourself," Riley replied. Their eyes met, just briefly. But the moment felt steady, grounding, like two wounded souls recognizing something familiar in the other. That evening, dinner was simpler than the Christmas feast, but just as comforting. Chicken soup simmered with herbs, crusty bread warmed in the oven, and freshly sliced apples. Riley helped Margaret chop vegetables, moving with a quiet sense of purpose. Margaret observed her thoughtfully, seeing resilience where Riley only saw fragility. After dinner, Grant bundled up and went outside to shovel the walkway. Riley stood at the doorway watching him for a few moments before joining him, picking up a spare shovel despite his protests. "You don't have to help," he said. "I know," she replied, "but I want to." They fell into a rhythm, shovels scraping gently through snow under the porch lights. Atlas ran circles around them, churning up powder with joyful energy. For the first time in a long while, Riley felt the weight of her life begin to shift, not gone, but shared. When they finished, Grant handed her a mug of hot cocoa Margaret had brought outside. Riley cupped it in both hands, letting the warmth seep into her palms. "Thank you," she whispered, "not just for the cocoa, but for everything." Grant didn't say anything. He just nodded, and in his silence was a promise she didn't yet know how to receive. But she felt it all the same. That night, as she lay beneath warm quilts in the attic room, Riley realized something astonishing. She wanted to stay. And for the first time in months, the idea of tomorrow didn't terrify her. It gave her something close to hope. Snow had fallen again overnight, blanketing Winter Harbor in a shimmering white that softened the hard edges of the world. Riley walked down Main Street the following afternoon, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. She wore the donated coat Margaret had insisted she take, an old but sturdy navy wool coat with wooden buttons and a slightly frayed collar. It wasn't stylish, but it was warm, and warmth mattered more than anything these days. After her meeting at the community center the previous day, Riley wanted to explore town a little, to understand the place that had unexpectedly opened a door for her. Winter Harbor was quaint in a way she'd never experienced. Brick storefronts, a small bakery with steamed-over windows, a used bookshop that smelled of old paper, and a harborfront boardwalk where the ocean sighed against the rocks. For the first time in months, Riley was walking not because she had nowhere to go, but because she did have somewhere to return to. It made every step feel astonishingly different. She had just turned down Sycamore Street when she noticed a woman shoveling snow outside a small crafting store. The woman waved. "You must be the young lady staying with the Carsons," she called out. Riley paused, offering a shy smile. "Yes, I'm Riley." The woman introduced herself as Evelyn Shore, a neighbor in her late 60s with soft gray curls and a round, grandmotherly face. Evelyn wore a knitted purple hat with an oversized pom-pom and a matching scarf, her winter coat decorated with tiny embroidered flowers. Her personality was warm, chatty, and curious. A woman who cared about community the way other people cared about hobbies. "Margaret mentioned you," Evelyn said with genuine kindness. "Said you were brave." Riley flushed, unused to hearing anything like that. Evelyn waved her frostbitten hand toward the store door. "Come inside if you need to warm up. The radiator's a bit moody, but the tea kettle always works." Riley thanked her but declined gently, promising she would visit another day. Encounters like that were still unfamiliar, but strangely comforting. She continued toward the community center for a small volunteer shift Nina had offered her. The air was cold but refreshing, and she walked with purpose. Inside the center, she helped Nina stack food pantry items, sort coats, and tidy the children's reading corner. While they worked, Nina introduced her to Tommy Ledger, a lanky teenage volunteer with olive skin, shaggy brown hair, and earnest brown eyes. Tommy was 16, awkward but sweet, the kind of kid who apologized even when he wasn't the one at fault. He came from a complicated home. His father had left when he was young, and his mother worked double shifts at the cannery. But Tommy channeled his loneliness into helping others. "You're Riley, right?" he asked shyly as they organized donated scarves. "My mom said you were staying with Officer Carson. He's cool, scary sometimes, but cool." "He's been very kind," Riley said, and the warmth in her voice wasn't something she could hide. Tommy grinned, sliding a box onto a shelf. "Atlas is the best, though. That dog's like a superhero." Riley laughed, the sound feeling easier each time. Hours later, after finishing her volunteer shift, Nina gave her a ride back toward the Carson home, but Riley asked to be dropped off a couple of blocks away so she could walk the final stretch. She liked the quiet of evening, the deep blue sky, the cold whisper of the sea breeze, the faint hum of the town settling into night. But as she walked past the alley near an abandoned print shop, a figure stepped out, blocking her path. Riley froze. She knew that silhouette, the hunched shoulders, the staggering gait, the heavy smell of stale alcohol. Derek Hale, a man from her past, thin, wiry, mid-40s, always wearing the same battered leather jacket. His dark hair was matted beneath a torn beanie. His face was sharp, ferret-like, with darting eyes and a permanent twitch in his jaw. Derek had been a familiar face in the homeless shelters during Riley's early months on the streets, a man whose bitterness toward life made him unpredictable and sometimes aggressive. He wasn't evil, just broken and angry, shaped by years of bad decisions and worse outcomes. But he was exactly the kind of person Riley had tried to avoid when she still lived on sidewalks. "Well, look who's playing princess now," Derek slurred, stepping closer. Thought you could leave us behind, didn't you? Riley's heart pounded. Derek, please, I don't want any trouble. Trouble? He laughed, the sound sharp as glass. You think you're better than the rest of us now? Staying in some fancy house? It's not. Don't lie to me. He grabbed her wrist, hard. Riley gasped, stumbling back. Stop, she whispered. Let me go. His grip tightened. You owe... A snarl cut through the cold, then a blur of black and tan fur slammed into the snow between them. Atlas, his ears forward, teeth bared, not attacking, but in a clear, controlled defensive stance. A second later, boots pounded against the snow as Grant sprinted into view. He must have been returning from patrol, but the moment he saw Riley struggling, every cell in his body moved with purpose. Hey! Grant's voice was a thunderclap. Get your hands off her! Derek startled, releasing Riley as if burned. Grant stepped between them, one arm shielding Riley behind him, while Atlas held Derek at bay, with a low growl vibrating through his chest. Derek threw up his hands defensively. I didn't do anything. Step back, Grant ordered. Now. Derek backed away, muttering curses, before staggering off into the darkness. Grant didn't pursue. His focus was entirely on Riley. Are you hurt? He demanded, voice rough with adrenaline. Riley shook her head, but her breath trembled. Grant gently cupped her elbows, steadying her. It's okay, he said more softly. I've got you. For a moment, the world shrank to the warmth of Grant's hands and the sound of Atlas's heavy breathing as he checked Riley anxiously. Grant exhaled shakily, the fear he'd felt still etched across his features. He had already lost one person he loved to circumstances outside his control. The idea of losing another, even someone he had known only a short time, made his chest tighten with a painful familiarity. Let's get you home, he said quietly. Riley nodded, unable to speak. They walked together, Atlas glued protectively at her side. When they reached the Carson house, the porch light glowed softly, casting a warm halo in the darkness. Margaret opened the door, even before they knocked. She must have seen them through the window. One look at Riley's shaken expression, and Margaret's calm face tightened with concern. Come inside, sweetheart. She didn't demand explanations. She simply wrapped an arm around Riley's shoulders and guided her to the couch. Grant explained what had happened in brief, clipped sentences. Margaret listened, her expression turning stern, but not toward Riley, toward the world that would dare harm someone trying to rebuild. When Grant finished, Margaret placed a hand on Riley's cheek. You're safe here, she said. Nothing will touch you under this roof. Riley's eyes stung with tears. She tried to swallow back. But Margaret was right. She was safe. Atlas rested his head on her knee. Grant sat beside her, not touching, but close enough that the warmth of him felt like its own kind of reassurance. And somewhere inside her, something fragile but essential whispered, You are not alone anymore. The next few weeks slipped into a gentle rhythm, each day stretching out with a sense of steadiness Riley had not known in a very long time. Winter Harbor remained locked in cold, frost on windows, ice along the harbor rocks, and pale sunlight filtering through gray skies. But the world inside the Carson home glowed with a warmth that seemed to defy the season. Every morning, Riley walked downstairs wrapped in one of Margaret's knitted sweaters. The kitchen always smelled of coffee and toasted bread, the radio humming softly in the background with old Christmas tunes that lingered beyond the holiday. Lily would be waiting at the table with Atlas curled at her feet. Grant, dressed for his patrol shift, sat nearby, sipping coffee while reviewing daily reports. And Riley, still adjusting to this new chapter of her life, would feel a small, quiet fullness settle inside her at the sight of it all. She had a place at the table, a chair someone expected her to fill. Her volunteer work at the community center soon turned into a part-time job. Nina had watched Riley with careful eyes, recognizing not only her work ethic, but the quiet empathy she carried like a second heartbeat. Some people just have a gift, Nina had said. You're one of them. Riley's responsibilities included sorting donations, guiding new visitors through the building, and assisting with youth activities. She found herself drawn to the younger volunteers, especially Tommy Ledger. Tommy, now more comfortable around her, often hovered in her orbit, asking questions about her past, but withdrawing whenever she appeared uncomfortable. He was a good kid, tall, lanky, with a shy smile and a genuine desire to help. His clothes were often a little too big, probably hand-me-downs, and his hair always fell into his eyes like he didn't know what to do with it. He carried loneliness quietly, like something fragile he didn't want anyone to touch. One afternoon, Nina introduced Riley to Sandra Lewis, a new face at the center. Sandra was in her early 30s, with dark curls pulled back in a tight ponytail, and a structured posture that suggested she wasn't used to letting her guard down. Her coat, plain brown wool, was buttoned up to her collarbone, and her expressive brown eyes scanned the room as though evaluating every detail. Sandra had been hired to spearhead a new transitional housing program for homeless youth. She came from a childhood marked by instability, moving between relatives' homes and temporary shelters, and that history had sculpted her into someone fiercely protective of teenagers who stood where she once had. "I heard you might be good with mentoring," Sandra said after their introduction, her tone blunt but not unkind. "I'd like you to join some planning meetings, see if it fits." Riley hesitated, unsure whether she was ready for that kind of responsibility. But Sandra added, "People who've lived through hardship usually understand it better than anyone with a degree." And so Riley agreed to attend the next session. Life at the Carson house shifted too. Grant became more attentive, not hovering, but present in ways that were subtle and steady. He showed her how to fix the back door when it stuck, taught her which tea blend Margaret preferred, and quietly left an extra pair of gloves on the entry table when he noticed her hands turning red in the cold. At night, he sometimes found her in the living room, reading by the fire, and though neither spoke much, the silences between them grew comfortable rather than awkward. Atlas's attachment to Riley grew even faster than Grant's. The dog followed her from room to room, nudging her hand for affection, planting himself at her feet whenever she sat on the couch. Even Lily joked one morning, "Atlas likes you more than he likes Daddy." Grant had only smiled, unable to deny the truth. One crisp January morning, Riley awoke to the sound of Margaret knocking lightly at her door. "Dear," she said through the wood, "breakfast in 10. And afterward, a surprise." Riley's heart fluttered with curiosity. After breakfast, pancakes, courtesy of Lily's insistence, Margaret handed Riley a folded stack of papers. "Your application for emergency transitional housing went through," she said gently. "You got approved." Riley blinked hard as emotion surged behind her eyes. It wasn't that she wanted to leave the Carson home. On the contrary, she had grown to love the warmth, the daily laughter, the feeling of belonging. But having a place of her own, the possibility of independence, felt like reclaiming a part of herself she thought had been lost permanently. Later that day, Grant insisted on driving her to see the apartment. "I want to make sure it's safe," he said, in the tone of a man trying and failing to sound casual. The building was part of a renovated duplex on Maple Street near the community center. Nothing fancy, but clean and sturdy. The landlord, Mr. Bennett, greeted them at the door. He was in his 70s, tall and thin, with white hair pulled back into a small ponytail. He wore a flannel shirt tucked neatly into worn jeans and had a slow, thoughtful way of speaking that made every sentence sound like a memory being shared. Mr. Bennett used to be a local carpenter, but arthritis forced him to retire early. Now he spent his days tending his small rental units and woodworking in his backyard shed. "Place is simple," he said, unlocking the door, "but I keep it warm and quiet. People deserve a clean start." Riley stepped inside. The living room was small with a single window facing the street. Sunlight filtered in through thin curtains. The kitchen had mismatched cabinets but smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. In the bedroom, a patchwork quilt lay folded on the bed, clearly left intentionally. "My late wife made it," Mr. Bennett explained softly. "She always wanted it to go to someone who needed comfort." Riley ran her fingers across the fabric, and for a moment she had to swallow a lump in her throat. By the time they left, Riley's chest felt full, not in a way that hurt, but in a way that made her believe she was becoming someone new. As they returned to the Carson home, Lily raced outside to greet them, cheeks rosy from playing in the snow. "Riley! Riley!" she shouted. "You got your own house? That means you're grown up now." Riley laughed as Lily wrapped herself around her waist. Atlas barked, bounding in excited circles. Grant stood behind them, hands in his pockets, watching her with an expression softer than any he'd worn before. "So," he said once Lily ran inside, "how do you feel?" Riley drew a slow breath. "Hopeful," she answered, "and scared, but mostly hopeful." Grant nodded, understanding more than she knew. "That's how you know you're moving forward." That evening, Margaret prepared a celebratory dinner. Roast chicken again, Riley's favorite, though she hadn't admitted it aloud. Mashed potatoes whipped perfectly smooth, and warm rolls. Afterward, Lily begged Riley to help with her school art project. They spread out colored papers, glue, and glitter across the living room floor. "It's a painting of us," Lily said, pointing proudly. "Me, you, Daddy, and Atlas." Riley's heart tightened in the most wonderful way. She smiled down at the picture, 4 figures holding hands beneath a bright sun. "It's perfect," Riley whispered. The house smelled of cinnamon and firewood. Snow fell softly beyond the windows. And in that moment, Riley realized something she had never dared to believe. She wasn't just being helped. She was being welcomed, wanted, loved in a quiet, growing way that felt like the beginning of a life she had once thought impossible. In the end, this story is a reminder that God's miracles rarely appear with thunder or bright flashes. More often, they arrive quietly, through ordinary people who choose kindness when no one is watching. A hug from a child, a door opened by a stranger, a moment of courage on a cold night. These are the small seeds of grace that grow into miracles. And just like the woman on the church steps, any one of us could be walking through a dark season. But God sends help in unexpected ways, a gentle voice, a caring hand, a heart willing to listen. When we choose compassion, we become part of His work on earth. We become the answer to someone's prayer. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and let us know how God has shown you grace in your own life. May the Lord bless you, protect you, and guide your steps wherever you go. And if you believe that kindness is one of God's greatest miracles, write Amen in the comments.